Shorvaska Brooklyn Vesta. Milos Daxon Murix.
The photograph arrived at 2:17 in the afternoon, forwarded by a college friend who added nothing but a single question mark. Jordan Calloway was sitting across from a notary public on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, a pen balanced between two fingers, a stack of documents roughly 3 inches thick fanned across the mahogany table. The room smelled of recycled air and expensive wood polish. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Hudson caught the February light and threw it back in pieces. Jordan had been in this building before, many times, always for the same reason: to sign something that would keep Calloway Ventures alive for another season. The phone buzzed. Jordan glanced at it, which was a mistake. The image filled the screen. A Gulfstream G700, white with a thin charcoal stripe running the length of the fuselage, photographed from below against a pale winter sky. The registration number along the tail was slightly blurred but readable to anyone who knew what they were looking for. Jordan knew. Jordan had stared at that registration number for 6 hours on a Tuesday night 18 months ago, cross-referencing it against a collateral schedule while a senior partner at Webb & Associates walked through the terms of a credit facility that would either save the company or be the most expensive mistake of Jordan's life. Below the photograph, in the caption, in Sloan Calloway's unmistakable handwriting style, complete with the lowercase affectations she had cultivated since college. Just got the most incredible gift from Mom and Dad. Meet my new baby. She doesn't have a name yet, but she's already perfect. Blessed doesn't begin to cover it. A string of emojis followed. A black heart, a small airplane, a diamond. The post had been live for 40 minutes. It had 37,000 likes. Jordan set the phone face down on the table and signed the document in front of him. The notary stamped it. The associate from Webb & Associates collected the pages without looking up. Jordan signed the next one, and the next, moving through the stack with the economy of motion that came from having done this too many times before, from having learned that the fastest way through paperwork was to stop reading it emotionally and start reading it the way a machine would, for the words that mattered, for the clauses that bound, for the numbers that did not lie, even when the people around them did. When the last page was signed and the notary had packed up and left, Jordan sat alone in the conference room for a moment. Marcus Webb came back in, carrying 2 cups of coffee he had gone to fetch from the machine down the hall because the associate had forgotten to order any. Marcus was 53, silver-haired, and had the particular quality of stillness that came from spending 3 decades watching wealthy families destroy themselves with their own decisions. He set 1 cup in front of Jordan and sat down. "Everything good?" Marcus said. "My parents gave my sister the jet," Jordan said. Marcus looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, "The G700. "Yes, the one that's currently serving as collateral on the Meridian credit facility." "Yes." Marcus was quiet. He picked up his coffee, held it without drinking, set it down. "Did they know?" Jordan looked at him. It was not an unkind look, but it was a precise one. "They knew what I told them when I closed the facility. I told them I was using personal assets as collateral. I told them the jet was one of them. My father said, and I am quoting, 'Whatever you need to do, just make sure it works.' That's not the same as knowing the specific legal implications." "No," Jordan agreed. "It is not." A pause. "But it is not the same as not knowing either." Marcus nodded slowly. Jordan picked up the phone, opened the post again, scrolled through the comments. People Jordan had never met congratulating Sloan on a gift she had not earned, in a plane she had no legal right to receive, using a caption that made no mention of the fact that someone had worked for 4 years to buy that aircraft, and another year and a half to leverage it against a debt that had been, until 18 months ago, about to take the entire Calloway family fortune down with it. Jordan put the phone away. The drive back to the apartment in Tribeca took 25 minutes. Jordan sat in the back of the car and called home. The phone rang 3 times before Diane Calloway picked up, her voice warm and slightly breathless, the way it always was when she had been entertaining, when the house had guests, when everything was going the way she had arranged for it to go. "Jordan, sweetheart, we were just talking about you." "I saw the post," Jordan said. A small pause. "Isn't it wonderful?" Sloane was absolutely floored. She cried, actually cried, which you know she never does, and Carter was there and he was so moved by the whole. "Mom," Jordan said, "the plane is collateral on the Meridian facility." Another pause. This one longer. "Your father handled all of that. He said it would be fine." "Did he say why it would be fine?" "He said you would understand. That you always understand." Her voice had shifted from warm to something slightly more careful, the way it always did when a conversation began to move toward territory she had not prepared for. "This is such an important moment for Sloane. Carter's family is extraordinary, Jordan. The Reeves Group is—" "I know what the Reeves Group is, Mom." "Then you understand what this means for all of us, for the company, for the family name." She said family name the way other people said holy ground. "Your father and Richard Reeves have been working on this for months. The merger—" "We can talk about the merger," Jordan said. "We can talk about all of it. But I need you to understand that the plane cannot be transferred. Not legally. Not without my signature." Diane was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice had lost the breathlessness entirely. What replaced it was not anger, not yet, but something closer to calculation. "I'm sure we can sort all of this out," she said. "Come to dinner Thursday. We'll sort it out over dinner." "I'll come to dinner," Jordan said. "Good. And Jordan." A beat. "Don't make this difficult." Jordan ended the call. Outside the window, the city moved past, in its usual indifferent rush. The car crossed into Tribeca, and Jordan looked out at the narrow streets, at the old brick buildings that had been warehouses once and were something else now, at the people moving through the cold with their heads down and their coats pulled close. Upstairs, in a filing cabinet Jordan had bought at an office supply store in Soho, and had never bothered to replace with anything better, there was a folder. In the folder was a copy of the Meridian Credit Facility Agreement, all 87 pages of it, with the collateral schedule attached as Exhibit C. Page 62 of Exhibit C listed, among other things, 1 Gulfstream G700 aircraft, registration number N814CJ, current market value $68 million, pledged as security against a revolving credit line of $200 million extended to Calloway Ventures, LLC. Jordan had read page 62 many times. Jordan had read all of Exhibit C many times. Jordan had done this not out of anxiety, but out of the particular discipline of someone who had learned, early and at some cost, that the only documents worth trusting were the ones you had read yourself. The car stopped. Jordan got out, nodded to the driver, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the February cold. 37,000 likes. Jordan went upstairs. The Greenwich house had been in the Calloway family for 30 years, long enough that it no longer looked like a purchase and had begun to look like a birthright. Jordan arrived on Thursday at 6:30, as requested, in a car that was neither ostentatious nor deliberately understated. Simply a car, a black sedan, driven by a man named Walter, who had been driving Jordan to various Calloway family obligations for 4 years and had learned to say very little. The driveway was already full. Jordan recognized Carter Reeves's Range Rover, pearl white, and beside it a rented BMW that probably belonged to someone from the Reeves side of things, someone brought in for an occasion that was being staged rather than simply hosted. The house glowed from every window. This was one of Diane Calloway's particular skills, the architecture of warmth, the arrangement of light and flowers and music that made a house feel like it was celebrating something even before you knew what the something was. Jordan had grown up inside this skill and had spent a long time believing it was love before understanding it was production. Sloane met Jordan in the entry hall. She was wearing something cream-colored and effortless, her dark hair loose, the engagement ring catching the chandelier light in a way that seemed deliberate. She was 28 and had the ease of someone who had never been required to be anything other than exactly what she was. "You came," she said, and kissed Jordan on the cheek. "I said I would," Jordan said. "Mom was worried you'd cancel." She linked her arm through Jordan's and steered them toward the living room the way a good host steers a guest. Smoothly, with just enough pressure that you moved in the right direction without quite noticing you'd been directed. "Carter is dying to meet you properly. We've talked about you." "Good things, I hope." Sloane laughed, a bright musical sound that carried across rooms. "Of course. I told him you're the one who actually keeps everything running." She said it the way someone says a thing they believe is a compliment, without understanding why it might not be. The living room held 12 people. Jordan moved through them with practiced ease, shaking hands, accepting a glass of wine, making the specific kind of conversation that these rooms required. Surface engagement, genuine enough to pass, careful enough not to commit. Carter Reeves was 31, tall, with the easy confidence of a man who had never had to earn a room. He shook Jordan's hand with both of his and said he'd heard a lot, and Jordan smiled and said likewise, and for a moment they assessed each other the way people from their particular world always assessed each other, quietly, thoroughly, and without showing that they were doing it at all. Richard Calloway held court near the fireplace. He was 64, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that filled spaces he entered, a quality Jordan had spent years studying and had eventually understood was not authority, but the performance of authority, which in certain rooms amounted to the same thing. He embraced Jordan, held him a beat longer than usual, and said, close and low, "Glad you're here. We'll talk after dinner." "We'll talk after dinner," Jordan agreed. Dinner was 4 courses and 2 kinds of wine and a conversation that orbited the merger the way a moon orbits a planet, always present, always influential, never directly addressed. Richard talked about the Reeves Group's expansion plans. Carter talked about their Pacific portfolio. Diane talked about the venue they were considering for the engagement party. Sloane talked about the jet, what she planned to do with it first, Paris, probably, or maybe the Maldives, and did Jordan want to come along on the maiden flight? Jordan said that sounded wonderful. After dessert, when the guests from the Reeves side had been ushered into the library for after-dinner drinks, Jordan found a quiet moment beside Richard, near the door to the study. Jordan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced an envelope, white, letter-sized, sealed. Richard took it. He turned it over. "What's this?" "A summary," Jordan said, "of the current legal status of the aircraft." Richard's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, a slight recalibration. He put the envelope in his breast pocket without opening it. I'll have our attorneys look at this. That would be a good idea, Jordan said. We can restructure the collateral, Richard said. Replace it with something else. The Meridian people are flexible. I know Frank Meridian personally. The terms of the facility don't allow substitution of collateral without the lender's written consent and my written authorization, Jordan said. Both of those things would take time. How much time? Longer than it would take for this to become a problem. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he put his hand on Jordan's shoulder, and the gesture was warm and paternal and entirely deliberate. You've always been the one I could count on, he said. From the beginning, you know that. Jordan said nothing. This family, everything we've built, none of it would be what it is without you. He squeezed Jordan's shoulder. I know that. Your mother knows it. We just need you to give us a little more room here. This merger is the biggest thing we've done in 20 years. The Reeves alliance changes everything. I understand what the merger means, Jordan said. Then you understand why we need this to go smoothly. His voice had the particular register of a man who was accustomed to being understood without having to explain himself. Whatever concerns you have, we'll address them. But we need this moment for Sloane. She's finally found something real, and Carter's family is... Dad, Jordan said quietly, with a steadiness that was neither cold nor accommodating. Read the document. Richard looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and went to join the guests in the library. Jordan set down the wineglass, found Diane in the hallway, said goodbye, and retrieved the coat from the closet by the front door. Walter was waiting in the driveway. The night was cold and very clear, and the stars over Greenwich were visible in a way they never were in the city. In the car, Jordan waited until they had cleared the long driveway and turned onto the road before taking out the phone. Marcus picked up on the second ring. How was dinner? Marcus said. I gave him the summary, Jordan said. And? He said he'd have his attorneys look at it. He mentioned Frank Meridian. Marcus made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He doesn't know Frank Meridian. He met Frank Meridian at a conference in 2019. They shook hands. I know. A pause. Jordan, you understand that if we do this, if we start the formal process, it goes to the board. It becomes a company matter, not a family matter. I know. And your father... I know, Jordan said for the third time, and the patience in his voice was not the patience of someone who hadn't considered the consequences. It was the patience of someone who had considered them more thoroughly than anyone else in the situation, and had arrived at a conclusion they were prepared to live with. Start the clock, Marcus, Jordan said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, okay, I'll file the formal notice Monday morning. Jordan thanked him and ended the call. 2 days later, Sloane posted another set of photographs from inside the G700's cabin. The cream leather seats, the mahogany veneer on the bulkheads, the small bar with its crystal glasses. The caption read, "She's even more beautiful on the inside. Some things in life you just know were made for you." The post had 62,000 likes by the time Jordan saw it. Jordan did not comment. The formal notice arrived at Callaway Ventures' registered address on a Monday morning, delivered by courier, addressed to the board of directors and the company's legal counsel simultaneously. Marcus had written it with the particular precision of a man who understood that legal language was a form of architecture, that the way you built a sentence determined what it could and could not hold. The notice stated, without dramatics, that the Gulfstream G700 aircraft bearing registration number N814CJ was pledged as collateral under the terms of the Meridian Credit Facility, that any transfer, encumbrance, or change of beneficial ownership required the written authorization of Jordan Calloway as the pledging party, and that no such authorization had been given or would be given absent a formal restructuring of the facility terms. It requested that the board acknowledge receipt and take no further action regarding the aircraft pending resolution. The board called an emergency session for Wednesday. Jordan arrived at Callaway Ventures offices in the Lever House on Park Avenue at 9 in the morning. The building had been a choice Jordan had made 4 years ago, a deliberate one. The Lever House had a history, a particular relationship between its glass curtain wall and the mid-century buildings around it. A sense of being modern without pretending the past didn't exist, which Jordan had found fitting. The board met in the conference room on the 31st floor, 8 people around a table, all of them in various stages of processing the notice they had received 2 days earlier. Richard sat at the head of the table. He had not spoken to Jordan since Thursday. He nodded when Jordan entered. Jordan nodded back and took a seat at the far end. The company's general counsel, a woman named Patricia Cho, walked the board through the legal situation in 15 minutes. She was thorough and did not editorialize. The situation was what the notice said it was. The aircraft could not be transferred. Restructuring the collateral would require Meridian's consent, which would require time and potentially renegotiated terms. The most direct solution was for Jordan to authorize the transfer, at which point the collateral schedule would need to be updated and Meridian notified. When she finished, Richard looked at Jordan. "What would it take," he said, "for you to authorize the transfer?" "A replacement collateral arrangement that satisfies the Meridian terms," Jordan said. "Acceptable assets. Current valuation, lender approval, probably 60 to 90 days minimum." "We don't have 60 to 90 days," Richard said. "The merger timeline—" "I know the merger timeline." Across the table, one of the outside board members, a man named Gerald Park, who had been on the Callaway board for 11 years and had the specific wariness of someone who had watched this family make decisions for a long time, raised a hand slightly. "Is there a cash solution? A buyout of the collateral position?" "The credit facility is $200 million, Jordan said. "Buying out that position would require replacing it with cash or equivalents. The company doesn't have that liquidity right now." He paused. "You know that, Gerald." Gerald lowered his hand. Richard said, "I've spoken to Frank Meridian's office. They're open to discussing alternatives." "That's good," Jordan said. "When Marcus hears from their counsel, we can set up a call." "I mean, I've spoken to Frank directly," Richard said. And the slight emphasis on directly was its own communication, the implication that personal relationships operated in a different register than legal processes. "He's willing to be flexible." "Frank Meridian's flexibility is a personal quality," Jordan said. "His credit facility is a legal document. The two are not the same thing." The room was quiet. Then the door opened, and Sloane walked in. She had not been invited to the board meeting. This was not a meeting that family members attended unless they were also board members, which Sloane was not. She was wearing a dark coat over a silk blouse, and her expression had the particular quality of someone who had decided, before entering the room, that they were angry. She looked at Jordan directly. "Is this really necessary?" she said. Jordan looked at her. "You're not on the board, Sloane." "It's a family matter." "It's a company matter," Patricia Cho said carefully. Sloane ignored her. "You're doing this to humiliate me," she said to Jordan. "In front of Carter's family. In front of everyone. Do you know what people are saying? Do you know how this looks?" "I know how it looks," Jordan said. "Then why? Because you're jealous? Because Mom and Dad finally did something for me for once, and you can't stand it." Her voice was controlled but brittle, the way a surface is brittle when it has been carrying something heavy for a long time. "You've always operated this way. In the background, invisible, keeping score. No one even knows what you actually do here because you've made sure of it, so that when anything goes wrong, you can pull out your little ledger and remind everyone how much they owe you." The room was very still. "You work in the shadows because that's all you're capable of," she said. "And now you're using a legal technicality to destroy the most important thing that's ever happened to me because you cannot stand to see me happy." Jordan looked at her for a long moment. There was no anger in the look, which was perhaps the most unsettling thing about it. There was simply attention, the quality of someone listening carefully to something they already knew, checking it against what they had expected, finding it accurate. Jordan stood up. "Excuse me," he said to the room, and left. He took the elevator to the lobby, walked through the Lever House arcade and out onto Park Avenue, and stood in the cold for a few minutes without moving. The city made its usual sounds: a taxi horn, the low frequency of the subway somewhere below, a woman walking past with a small dog, and a coffee and a phone call she was losing. That evening, Jordan met Marcus at a bar on Lexington Avenue that Marcus had been going to since the 90s, a dark wood and brass place that had somehow survived. They ordered drinks, and Marcus listened while Jordan talked, which was not something Jordan did often or easily. Jordan talked about the 18 months after the board's previous financial crisis, about the night in the Tribeca apartment when the numbers had finally stopped lying, and the reality of what Callaway Ventures owed had become clear, about the calls Jordan had made and the assets Jordan had put up and the legal instruments Jordan had signed. About how, during those 18 months, Richard had called Jordan twice a week for status updates, and Diane had called to ask whether Jordan was eating properly, and no one had once said, "Thank you," or "We know what this is costing you," or "We see you." Marcus listened to all of it. He drank his bourbon slowly. When Jordan finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's something you should know. I've been looking at the merger documents. The Reeves Group agreement." Jordan looked at him. "There's a clause," Marcus said. "Section 14, subsection C. If the merger fails to close within the agreed window, which is now 11 weeks away, Callaway Ventures forfeits the earnest deposit." "How much?" Marcus set down his glass. $40 million. The bar made its quiet sounds. Someone laughed at the other end of the room. Jordan looked at the glass in front of him, at the way the light moved through the amber liquid. "Does my father know about the clause?" Jordan said. "His attorneys drafted it," Marcus said. "So, yes." Jordan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was the same as it always was: level, unhurried, precise. "He knows the merger can't close without my authorization on the collateral. He knows the company can't absorb a $40 million forfeiture, and he still thought I would just sign." "He thought you'd do what you've always done," Marcus said, and said it gently, without judgment. "He thought you'd find a way to make it work." Jordan picked up the glass, held it, set it down again without drinking. Outside, Park Avenue moved through its Tuesday evening. The lights changed and changed again. Jordan sat in the dark wood bar and understood, with a clarity that was not anger and not grief, but something colder and more permanent than either, that the people who had raised him had built an entire financial and familial structure on the assumption that Jordan's capability was a resource they could draw on without limit and without cost. That the jet had not been a mistake. That it had been, in some way, They would never fully articulate even to themselves. A test, not of whether Jordan could be pushed, but of how much Jordan could absorb before pushing back. They had found out. The board of Callaway Ventures met again on a Friday morning, 3 weeks after the first emergency session. Marcus had requested the meeting, and the request had come with a formal agenda, which was the clearest possible signal to everyone who received it that what was about to happen would be conducted according to process rather than sentiment. Jordan arrived 7 minutes early, which was unusual. Marcus was already there, his briefcase open, 2 sets of documents stacked neatly before him. The board filed in. Richard came in last, with Patricia Cho beside him, and took his seat at the head of the table. He had aged, Jordan noticed, in the way that men of his generation aged under stress. Not visibly, not in the face, but in some quality of the light around him, as though the certainty he carried had begun to cost something. Marcus began. He was thorough, and he was unhurried, and he was, as he always was in rooms like this, entirely without theater. He walked the board through the collateral position, through the legal status of the aircraft, through the 3-week period during which Callaway Ventures Counsel had made 2 informal inquiries to Meridian's office and received 2 politely non-committal responses. He walked them through the timeline of the merger agreement and the terms of Section 14, subsection C. He put the $40 million forfeiture clause on the screen where everyone could read it. Then he said, simply and clearly, "My client is formally withdrawing his personal guarantee on the Meridian credit facility, effective 30 days from today, pursuant to Section 9.4 of the facility agreement, which allows for withdrawal with 30 days written notice." The room was very quiet. Patricia Cho said, "If the guarantee is withdrawn, Meridian can call the full facility." "Yes," Marcus said. $200 million, Gerald Park said. "Yes," Marcus said again. Richard's voice was controlled, but Jordan could hear, underneath the control, something that had not been there before. "Jordan," he said, "this is not the way to handle this." "This is the way I'm handling it," Jordan said. "You're going to destroy everything. 23 years of building this company. The merger, the Reeves alliance, Carter's family will walk. They will walk, Jordan. And this family will—" "I want to talk about the $40 million, Jordan said. Richard stopped. "Section 14C, Jordan said. "Your attorneys drafted that clause. You knew the merger couldn't close without my authorization. You knew, at the time you made the gift, that you were creating a legal problem you couldn't solve without me. And you made the gift anyway." A pause. "I want to understand your thinking." Richard looked at him from the head of the table. For a moment, just a moment, something crossed his face that was not anger and not strategy. Something that might have been shame. "We thought you would find a solution," he said. "You always do." "I did," Jordan said. "This is it." Sloan, who had been allowed into this meeting by a board that had evidently decided to stop pretending the family dimension wasn't present, stood up from her chair. She was across the table from Jordan, and she looked at him with an expression that had moved past anger into something more desperate. "Jordan, please. If the merger falls apart, Carter, I don't know what that does to us, to our engagement. His father is very traditional, and the idea that our family created a scandal." "I'm sorry about that," Jordan said, and he meant it, which was the complicated part. "Then fix it," she said. "Just sign whatever they need you to sign. We'll figure out the collateral later. You can come up with something. You always come up with something." "Sloan," Jordan said. She stopped. "I'm not going to sign," Jordan said. She sat down. Gerald Park cleared his throat. "Before we go any further," he said, "there's a matter I believe the board should be made aware of." He looked around the table. "I've been reviewing the shareholder registry in connection with some unusual trading activity over the past 6 months. I brought it to Patricia's attention this morning." Patricia Cho placed a single sheet of paper in the center of the table. "A company called Bluefield Capital Management," Gerald said, "has been acquiring Callaway Ventures shares on the open market over a period of approximately 7 months. The acquisitions were structured to stay below the reporting threshold on any individual transaction. Cumulatively, however, Bluefield Capital now holds 34% of Callaway Ventures' outstanding shares." He looked at Jordan. "The beneficial owner of Bluefield Capital, according to the Delaware Corporate Registry, is Jordan Callaway." The room was silent. Diane Callaway, who had come in with Richard and had been sitting against the wall in the chair that was technically not a board member's seat, but that she had always occupied in board meetings anyway, made a small sound. Richard looked at Jordan. His face had gone very still. 34%, Richard said. "Yes," Jordan said. "You're the largest single shareholder." "Yes." "Since when?" 7 months. Jordan let that sit for a moment. "Around the time you started structuring the merger without consulting me. Around the time I began to understand that the contributions I'd made to this company were considered a background condition rather than a decision." Richard leaned forward. "That's a hostile acquisition. That's a hostile—" "It's a market purchase," Marcus said. "Every transaction was at market price. There's nothing hostile about buying shares in a company you have legitimate reason to be invested in." "You were building a position to use against us," Richard said, and his voice had lost its composure now, the authority draining out of it and leaving something rawer underneath. "I was building a position to give me options," Jordan said, "the same way you built a merger agreement with a $40 million trap in it to give you options." He looked at his father across the length of the table. "We've both been planning. The difference is that you assumed I wasn't." Richard pushed back his chair. He stood. For a moment, he was simply standing at the head of the table, 64 years old, and something about the way he was standing had changed. The performance of authority was gone, and what remained was a man trying to calculate a situation he had not seen coming. "We will contest this," he said. "We will challenge the trading. We'll bring in outside counsel." "That's your right," Jordan said, standing as well. "You cannot do this to this family." Jordan looked at him. The look held everything that the past 18 months had accumulated, and it held none of it, because the particular discipline of someone who has spent years being underestimated is that they do not spend their capital on expression. They spend it on position. "I haven't decided what I'm going to do with the shares," Jordan said, "but I have decided what I'm not going to do." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "I'm not going to sign the transfer authorization. I'm not going to maintain a personal guarantee on behalf of a company that treated my contributions as a utility it could draw on without consent. And I'm not going to pretend, in this room or any other room, that the way the last 18 months have gone was acceptable." He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "The 30-day notice period starts today," he said. "If Meridian decides to call the facility, you'll have some decisions to make. Marcus will be available to discuss options." He left. Outside, the Park Avenue morning was cold and bright, the kind of February day that felt like a clarification after a long murkiness. Jordan walked 2 blocks without a destination, just to move, and then stopped at a corner and stood with the wind coming down the avenue from the north. Somewhere upstairs, in the Lever House conference room, Richard Calloway was learning that the infrastructure he had built his latest plan upon had a will of its own. Somewhere in Greenwich, there was a house full of light and flowers and the careful architecture of warmth, and it was about to become a more complicated place. Somewhere, Sloane's phone would be buzzing with a call from Carter Reeves's father, asking questions that would need answers. Jordan flagged a cab, got in, gave the address of the Tribeca apartment, sat in the back and watched the city pass and did not think about any of it for the length of the ride, which was the closest thing to rest he had had in 18 months. The call came on a Sunday, 12 days after the board meeting. Jordan was in the apartment making coffee when Richard called. Not his assistant. Richard himself, which was unusual enough that Jordan answered on the third ring. His father's voice was different. Not defeated exactly, but stripped of something. The register of a man who had spent the week talking to lawyers and investment bankers and had arrived, by a process of elimination, at the recognition that there were no doors he could open without Jordan's cooperation. "I need to meet," Richard said. "Okay," Jordan said. "Not Marcus, not the board, just us." Jordan looked out the window at the river, at the gray-green water in the winter light. "Come to the apartment," he said. "Tonight, if you want." "I'd prefer neutral ground." "The apartment is neutral ground," Jordan said. "It's my ground. You've never been here. I think that's appropriate, given the conversation we're going to have." A pause. Then, 7 o'clock. Richard arrived at 7:15, which was itself a kind of message, the slight lateness of a man who needed to demonstrate that he still controlled something, even the minutes. He wore a coat Jordan didn't recognize, charcoal, well cut, and he looked around the apartment with an expression Jordan couldn't entirely read. The apartment was not what he had expected, probably. It was not ostentatious. It was spare and considered, the furniture chosen for how things felt rather than how they looked, books on shelves that had been actually read, a single large photograph on the wall, the Hudson at dusk, fog on the water, the far bank barely visible. Jordan had made coffee. He put a cup in front of Richard and sat across from him. Richard began with the predictable opening. He had been talking to the other shareholders, he said. The remaining 66% was distributed among outside investors, the family trust, and a small portion that had been issued to key executives over the years. If those shareholders voted as a bloc, and he had reason to believe they would, they could limit Jordan's board influence despite the 34% position. "I know," Jordan said. "Then you know this isn't over." "I know it's not over," Jordan said. "I didn't expect it to be." Richard looked at him. Outside, the river made no sound. They were high enough that the city was a low hum rather than a specific noise. "What do you want?" Richard said. And for the first time Jordan could remember, the question was genuine. Not rhetorical, not tactical, but the actual question. Jordan took a moment with it. "I want the company to be run by people who understand what the company is worth and what it cost to get there," Jordan said. "I want the financial decisions to reflect the actual risk exposure and not the social ambitions of the family." He paused. "And I want to be done pretending that the arrangement we've had for the last 4 years was equitable." You were compensated," Richard said, and heard himself say it, and something in his face shifted. "I was paid a salary," Jordan said. "That was appropriate for a senior executive with no ownership stake. While I was using personal assets as collateral against a $200 million debt taken on behalf of a company I didn't own. Those two things are not equivalent." Richard was quiet. "The jet was the last one," Jordan said, and said it without heat. Not because it was the biggest thing, because it told me that you had calculated, maybe not consciously, but you had calculated that there was no amount of inequity I wouldn't absorb. That my function in this family was to be the one who kept things running regardless of what anything cost me personally. Richard put both hands around his coffee cup. He looked at the table. When he looked up, his eyes had the look of a man who was doing something difficult. "Your mother and I," he started, and stopped. "Dad," Jordan said, "I don't need an explanation. I need a negotiation." Richard blinked. Then, slowly, something that had been wound very tight in him began to loosen. "What are the terms?" Jordan had written them. He slid a single page across the table. A formal board seat. An equity stake commensurate with the contribution history Jordan's attorneys had documented. Going back 4 years. A restructuring of the collateral arrangement with Meridian that replaced the personal guarantee with a properly secured corporate instrument. And a line at the bottom that was not legal language but plain text. The merger with Reeves Group proceeds only if the terms reflect accurate risk allocation and are reviewed by independent counsel retained by Jordan Calloway. Richard read it twice. "Carter's family may walk if the timeline slips further," he said. "That's possible," Jordan said. Sloan's relationship with Carter is not a variable I can manage," Jordan said. "I'm sorry about that. I mean that genuinely." Richard looked at the page for a long time. Then he put it down and folded his hands, and he was quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are doing the difficult work of changing their minds. When he finally spoke, his voice was different from any version of it Jordan had heard before. Not warm exactly, not the performed warmth of the Greenwich House, but something smaller and more actual. "I didn't see you," Richard said. "I don't mean I overlooked you. I mean, I chose, over and over, not to look directly at what you were doing and what it was worth, because looking directly at it would have required me to change things, and changing things was harder than trusting that you would manage." He stopped, started again. "That was a failure. Mine." Jordan looked at his father. The room was very quiet. "I know," Jordan said. "I don't know how to fix the last 4 years." "You don't fix them," Jordan said. "You just do the next 4 differently." Richard nodded. He picked up the page, folded it carefully, and put it in his coat pocket. "I'll have my attorneys review this Monday," he said. "I'll call off the shareholder block." A pause. "I'll talk to your mother." He stood. Jordan stood. They were the same height, which Jordan had not noticed in years, had perhaps been trained not to notice. Richard picked up his coat from the chair. "The photograph," he said, looking at the wall. "The Hudson at dusk." "I took it," Jordan said. 4 years ago, the night I finalized the Meridian terms." Richard looked at it for another moment. Then he left. Jordan stood at the window for a long time after he heard the elevator doors close. 3 days later, Sloan arrived. She had called ahead, which was unusual for her, and she arrived in the middle of the afternoon in a coat that was expensive and slightly disheveled, as though she had put it on quickly. She did not look the way she had looked in any of their recent encounters. Not bright, not performing, not calculating. She looked tired and younger for it. Jordan let her in. She stood in the middle of the living room and looked around and said nothing for a moment. "Carter's father called the engagement into question," she said finally. "Not broken, not yet, but into question." "I'm sorry," Jordan said. "Are you?" "Yes." He meant it the way he had meant it in the board meeting. Genuinely, and without being moved to undo what he'd done. She looked at him with an expression that was trying to find the angle and couldn't quite locate it. "What would it take," she said, "to fix this? The merger, the timeline. What would it take for you to move faster, to give them what they need?" "I gave Dad a document Thursday night," Jordan said. "If he signs it, things move forward." "And if I asked you? Not as a business thing. As your sister." Jordan looked at her. She was 28, and she was trying, in the only way she knew how, which was the way she had always gotten things, by being present and asking directly and expecting the answer she wanted. "I love you," Jordan said. "That's not the issue." "Then what is the issue?" "The issue is that love doesn't mean I owe you a $68 million asset that I pledged against a debt that I took on to save a company that didn't treat me like a shareholder." He said it without anger, without the satisfaction of finally saying it. Just clearly. Way you state a fact when you have decided it is no longer worth obscuring. The jet isn't about you and me. It never was. It was about what our parents decided they could take without asking, because they had learned I wouldn't object. Sloane was quiet. "I'm not angry at you," Jordan said. "I want to be clear about that. You didn't create the system. But you benefited from it, and you knew you were benefiting from it, and you didn't ask questions because the answers would have been inconvenient." She sat down on the edge of the couch. The dishevelment in her coat seemed more pronounced suddenly, as though something that had been holding her posture had quietly let go. "What happens now?" she said. "To us, to the family." "That depends on a lot of choices," Jordan said. "Not just mine." "I'm not good at this," she said, and said it with a simplicity that Jordan had not expected, that caught him slightly off guard. "The parts you're good at. The planning, the patience, the sitting in a room and being willing to let things be uncomfortable for as long as they need to be. I'm not built that way." "I know," Jordan said. "I don't know how to fix what I said in the board meeting." "You don't have to fix it today," Jordan said. "You just have to be honest about whether you want things to be different." She looked at the photograph on the wall. "Did you really take that?" "Yes." "It's good," she said, quietly, as though admitting something. "I didn't know you did things like that." "There are a lot of things about me that you don't know," Jordan said. "That's not a criticism. It's just true." She sat with that for a moment. Then she stood up and put her coat back on properly, and looked at her brother with an expression that was not a resolution and not a beginning, but something more honest than either. The look of someone who has just understood the size of a conversation they are only at the start of. "I'll talk to Carter," she said. "I'll explain that the timeline is a legal process and not a family drama." "That would help," Jordan said. She nodded, went to the door, stopped with her hand on the handle, the way people in this family stopped at doors, apparently, and turned back. "Jordan," she said, "the caption, on the post." She pressed her lips together. "I'll take it down." "You don't have to," Jordan said. "I want to," she said. And then she left. Jordan stood in the empty apartment. The afternoon light was coming through the west-facing windows now, long and pale the way February light in New York is long and pale, making everything it touches look like it is in the process of being reconsidered. Jordan went to the kitchen and finished the coffee that had been sitting on the counter since morning, cold now, and stood at the window and looked at the river. 2 weeks later, Jordan and Priya Mehta sat at a table by the window of a small place in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn. Not the kind of coffee shop that tried to be anything other than a coffee shop, with its mismatched chairs and the steam from the espresso machine and the sound of a playlist that was slightly too loud and entirely right. Priya had been Jordan's colleague at an investment firm years ago, before Jordan had gone to Callaway Ventures. And she was the kind of friend who did not need you to explain the full context, because she had been paying attention all along. She was eating a piece of toast. Jordan was holding a cup of coffee. Outside the window, a woman walked past with two small children who were arguing about something with the total conviction of people for whom the argument was the most important thing that had ever happened. "So, the merger?" Priya said. "On pause," Jordan said. "Dad's working with the Reeves Group on revised terms. Slower timeline, independent review. Carter's still around. I think Sloan is handling it better than I expected. And the jet? Still technically mine. Probably for another year until the collateral restructure goes through." Jordan half smiled. "I have no plans to use it." Priya looked at him. "How are you?" she said, meaning it the way only certain people mean it, not as a courtesy, but as an actual inquiry. Jordan considered the question. "Lighter," he said, "which is strange, given that I'm in the middle of the most complicated legal and professional period of my life." "Not strange," Priya said. "You've been carrying something for a long time." "I have," Jordan agreed. "Does it feel like what you expected? Pulling back?" Jordan looked out the window. The two children had resolved their argument, or abandoned it, and were now walking hand in hand in the way that small children walk, with the slightly unsteady forward momentum of people still figuring out how their bodies work. "I thought it would feel like winning," he said. "It doesn't feel like winning." "What does it feel like?" "Like finally being honest about what I was worth and what I was owed," Jordan said. "Which isn't a victory exactly. It's just accurate." Priya nodded slowly. She ate her toast. Outside, the Brooklyn afternoon moved through its ordinary business. A delivery truck double-parked. A dog investigated a fire hydrant with scientific thoroughness. A man sat on a stoop reading a paperback with the focused contentment of someone who had nowhere else to be. "What do you do now?" Priya said. Jordan thought about it, about the 34%, about the board seat that was being formalized, about the new terms with Meridian, about the folder in the filing cabinet that could be moved, now, to a different drawer. Not the one marked emergency, but the one marked resolved. "I do the work," Jordan said. "The same work, but differently, on terms that are accurate." "That's enough," Priya said. "Yes," Jordan said. "It is." They sat in the coffee shop as the afternoon went about its business, and the light came through the window at a low angle the way it does in Brooklyn in late February, when the season is just beginning to think about turning. Not warm yet, but no longer the same cold it had been. The kind of light that doesn't promise anything, but tells you the distance to spring is measurable. They didn't talk about the Callaways, or the merger, or the aircraft still sitting in a hangar at Teterboro with its registration number and its $68 million history. They talked about other things, small things, the ordinary things that make up a life when you are no longer spending all of it on a structure that was never built to hold you equally. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from the work, but from the distance between what you are worth and what you are told you are worth. And most people who live inside that distance for long enough stop being able to feel it. They adjust. They normalize. They tell themselves it is a reasonable trade for belonging to something larger than themselves. What is harder and rarer is the moment when you stop adjusting. When you add up the ledger not with bitterness but with clarity, and you understand that the number at the bottom is not a grievance, but a data point, and that data points, unlike emotions, are actionable. The version of Jordan Callaway, who had signed documents at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and absorbed what came next and found solutions, and never once said, "This is not equitable" had been useful to many people. Useful the way infrastructure is useful, relied upon, taken for granted, noticed only in the event of failure. That version had done good work. It had kept things standing that might otherwise have fallen. But being needed, Jordan had come to understand, is not the same thing as being valued. Being needed means you are load-bearing. Being valued means someone has looked at the structure, understood what it would cost to replace you, and made a conscious decision to treat that knowledge as a debt rather than an assumption. The difference between those two things is the difference between a tool and a partner, and no amount of salary or family dinners or photographs of jets on social media could paper over it once you had seen it clearly. Jordan had seen it clearly. And having seen it, the only honest response was not anger, not the dramatic exit, not the satisfaction of having proved a point, but simply the quiet and permanent decision to operate, from here on out, on terms that were true. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.